Welcome to Politics in Education, an online panel discussion hosted by South Dakota News Watch, the state's only independent nonprofit journalism organization. This one-hour discussion is the latest segment in News Watch's ongoing South Dakota Matters series of statewide polls and panel discussions. I'm News Watch Content Director Bart Van Cook, and I'll be the moderator of this discussion. Tonight, we've gathered 4 experts on public education in South Dakota to discuss some of the challenges facing public educators in our state, to examine how these new stresses are factoring into a worsening teacher shortage across the state, and also to discuss possible solutions to improve the K-12 system and move past some of the current turmoil. As Newswatch recently reported in a 3-part series, myself and colleague Stu Whitney showed how the divisive politics and culture wars that have swept across America are making their way into public school classrooms in debates over curriculum, over how teachers do their jobs, what should be taught in regard to history, civics, race, and gender, which books should be used, and even how school classrooms should be decorated. Whitney also showed how national political players are simultaneously influencing new education legislation in South Dakota and other states. Hovering over it all is the controversy over critical race theory, a concept that adds a racial component to the framing of American history, which is strongly opposed by Governor Kristi Noem and others, but which many educators say is not being taught in South Dakota K-12 schools and only rarely in state universities. Please note that viewers in attendance can submit questions to the moderator using the chat function on the Zoom platform at any time during the conversation. Let me start by introducing our expert panelists. Alphabetically, we welcome Sharon Andrews, an education professor at Augustana University, who also directs the teacher education program. Also joining us is Michael Berkland, a former teacher who earlier this month was elected as a new member of the Rapid City School Board. Retired teacher Phil Bjornberg, who taught at Parker High School for 34 years, is also with us. And we have with us Jim Holbeck, former superintendent of schools in Harrisburg, who's now board development director at the Associated School Boards of South Dakota. Welcome to all our panelists, and thank you for participating in this important discussion. I'd like to begin with Mr. Holbeck and try to set a baseline of sorts for tonight's discussion. After Newswatch published this series, we received hundreds of comments from readers on social media, some who insisted that the expert sources in our articles had it all wrong, some arguing that critical race theory is being taught in public schools, that children are being indoctrinated to a radical left-wing way of thinking, that true history is being slanted toward a liberal agenda, and that teachers are trying to promote transgender or LGBTQ lifestyles among students. Mr. Holbeck, from your vast experience as an administrator and now association exec, have you seen evidence that public education in South Dakota is under threat or has been infiltrated in any way by a hyper-liberal mindset, or that our teachers are trying to indoctrinate students? Did our series get it wrong on that front?
No, you didn't get it wrong at all. And a lot of times I think, it's when I walk into a bank and I use a bank, I don't think I'm a banker, and it seems like anybody who's ever been in a school thinks that they're a superintendent or an educator and that they know exactly how it should be done. I was in the role of being a superintendent for 29 years, and I'll tell you that that didn't happen. I was a government teacher for most of those years, and I taught government to my students, and a lot of times during the year they'd say, well, what party do you belong to? And I'd say, well, why don't you guess? And they'd guess wrong most of the time. And I thought, you know what, I'm doing my job right, because it's not my job to try to teach people to be a Democrat or a Republican. That's what our educators do. They're not out there trying to make mini-me's. They're out there trying to show both sides of things. But I'm afraid sometimes today, there's some people who don't want to hear both sides. They want to hear their side.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I wonder, to keep that line of discussion going, Professor Andrews, in your role in helping train future generations of teachers, what impact have you seen from this increased pressure placed on teachers to act a certain way or teach a certain way, and the heightened focus on curriculum from outside forces? Do you think that increasing politicization of public education is adding to the teacher shortage?
I noticed it for the first time really this year with some of my student teachers that I was supervising. One that was mentioned in the article especially brought it up a couple of times. I agree with Jim. I mean, I've been out in schools for the past 40 years, either teaching myself, supervising student teachers. Sometimes I supervise student teachers from other institutions who are in South Dakota doing their student teaching. And I just don't see it. I mean, what is being taught are the standards. There's a lot of content areas that teachers have a lot of autonomy there. I've been in elementary classrooms, PE classrooms, high school, middle school, private schools, public schools, Sioux Falls schools, Vermilion. It just kind of baffles me, because teachers are just, if they only had time to teach the content they're supposed to teach, there's so many other peripheral issues that they're dealing with. Like Jim said, everybody thinks they're an expert on education because they sat in a classroom. When's the last time have some of these people actually been in a classroom to see exactly what's going on in schools? I've been out in schools consistently for the last 4 decades, and teachers are just trying to do what they have a passion to do and what they're been trained to do. I don't see this indoctrination or these agendas. I don't know. I've been in a lot of different schools.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. I'd like to ask Mr. Birkeland, first, congratulations on your electoral victory, but can you share with us what your experience was like as a teacher in the Rapid City schools, why you left the profession, and what prompted you to run for school board?
So much of why I left are the same things that prompted me to run for school board. I was in a position where I could take a risk and leave my teaching position to kind of try to make some more procedural changes at a higher level. I was hearing from my colleagues, many of these things that we're discussing tonight, that they're feeling like they weren't trusted, that they didn't have the resources to do their jobs, that they were only doing this job still because they couldn't go anywhere else at this time in their life. And that's just not how it should be in education. So I decided to take that risk and try to find a different job and start teaching online. And as part of that, I wanted to get more involved. I had been going to board meetings for the whole year, basically. And then I was approached by a group that asked me to be the candidate. I hadn't really thought of that when I resigned, but decided that I would take that on and take that challenge. And as I was campaigning and talking to our community, I was hearing a lot of these same issues come up. And the really big thing for me regarding critical race theory is if I talked to 10 different people, I got 10 different definitions about what they thought that meant. And so depending on how you defined it, it may be in our schools, and it should be in our schools if you define it as a math problem featuring a Black mathematician. Absolutely, that is in our schools, and absolutely that should be. If you define it as telling all the white kids that they should feel bad, then no, that's not in our schools, and no, it shouldn't be. So a lot of what I found in my campaign was it falls on that definition.
Yeah, it's a complicated concept, actually, that isn't simple to define, teach, or understand. And I think that's what makes it compelling, but also controversial. I wonder, Mr. Bjornberg, you spent decades in the classroom as a history teacher. What changes did you see over time and how teachers were treated, trusted, or respected? And how did that play out? And I wonder, is that faith and trust in teachers is it still warranted? Why is it important for parents, students, and the public at large to have faith and trust in classroom teachers?
Well, I can only speak. I was in one school district for 34 years, and I was very lucky to have backing from including Jim Holbeck of administrators and school boards. We have curriculum, we have guidelines, we have standards, and I guess, we're hired by school districts and they trust us to follow those and to add on what we believe is necessary to fill in the gaps. We do weekly lesson plans, so if our administrators have problems with something, they can talk to us dealing with those. But I was spoiled. I mean, I really don't have any view of what was going on in other schools, but I would basically was to a certain degree left alone in my classroom, and they trusted me to teach, what they thought I knew was best. And so I was very lucky in that way.
Well, to stay on that, how do you feel about what you read in our series and what you're hearing now from Professor Andrews, Mr. Birkeland, others about what the pressures, this stress that teachers are feeling, that if they say or do the wrong thing, they could be sued or brought into, up on, asked about their job performance or possibly lose their job. How do you feel about what's taken place?
Yeah, in my article, I said towards the end, I think I would have done the same thing if I was still teaching today. And that's easy to say when you're not in the job anymore. But, if you're a second or third year teacher, that's tough. You got to worry about, you're worrying about all of us who have taught before that first year of teaching. You're just hanging on by a thread every night, trying to get through the next day, let alone dealing with those kinds of situations. So I can't imagine what new teachers are going through. And you can talk about, Jim talked about, everybody thinks they've been in the classroom. He coached basketball, I coached basketball, same thing. That's gotten where everybody that's watched a basketball game on TV thinks they're an expert coach, and they let everybody know about it. So I'm sure it's the same thing going on in a lot of school districts. Again, I was very lucky at Parker for all those years to have not had too many situations jump up like that. And if they would have, I think I had administration that would have backed me strongly. So very lucky in that way.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Holbeck, can you give our viewers an idea of who actually decides what's taught in public schools in South Dakota? Who determines curriculum, education standards? I know they're different, but it's a very subtle difference. And has that changed in any major way in recent years? I guess I'm wondering where this controversy over classroom teaching came from, in your opinion.
So you're asking the old guy to give a history lesson here, is what you're saying. So when I first started, it was willy-nilly, and I was a social science teacher, I was 22 years old, come out, I'm handed the textbook that the school picked out, and I taught from it. And I taught directly from the textbook. That was pretty much my whole lessons. Who wrote the textbook? Somebody down in Texas, where most of the textbooks were written. And my class was doing one thing. The middle school social science teacher had his own book, might have overlap, might have gaps. Nobody was paying much attention to that. We were not doing curriculum correctly. All we did was we all had a textbook and we taught from it. So then we realized that's not good. You need to have K-12 where you have curriculum going from the beginning to the end. You don't have gaps, and you're going to make sure that you cover everything. And so schools that were large enough had curriculum directors that did that. Those curriculum directors made sure that all those people were teaching what they should when they should. We found out that in South Dakota, as well as many other places, that wasn't always happening. And so the state started to look at what can we do better. And the nationals started to say, hey, education's failing. One of the things that we need to do is make sure that we have curriculum that is being followed. And so the state adopted a lot of national standards. Well, nowadays, that's such a scary word. Anytime anybody says we're doing something nationally, people get all bent out of shape. And we start talking about local control. Well, local control was willy-nilly, and a lot of times it didn't work. So the state has standards, and though those standards have changed various times, the schools are to follow those. And the curriculum is to be based towards it, and the tests are based on the curriculum that we're told that would meet the test scores. And so with this game of test scores being like basketball scores, we all want to make sure that we're not the lowest score in all the schools of the state. We tended to fall in line with doing a lot of that stuff. They're following that curriculum. That curriculum made sure that we stayed in line. My fear today is this. We are turning this into a political battle. And we've got Democrats saying that should be this and Republicans saying it should be that. And I can tell you, I've got a strong opinion on what party I might lean towards, but I do not have a strong opinion that that party should control curriculum, because parties will change. And we cannot get into this where political parties are going to be changing curriculum on our kids of South Dakota every time somebody gets reelected or elected.
To clarify then, there's been no sea change in the way that standards and curriculum are developed in the last 2 years or year that would have led to this concern about what's being taught. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct. It's a bigger picture thing. I think society's got a lot of problems. I hate to take too much time on this, but once in a while when I was a superintendent, I'd get into an issue with a student, and I'd have a divorced set of parents sitting in my classroom, and they are in my office, and they'd be fighting over who did the worst job parenting the kid that I had in front of them. And I'd say, you can't fight your divorce battles in my office. That's not the place to do it. That's what schools are faced with right now. We are fighting the divorce battles of the two parties in this nation. And either party wants it solved in their school. And that's not where it should be.
Understood. Well, thank you. I saw during the Rapid City School Board election, there was some data I'd seen. I know there's a 550 teacher openings in the state. That's a couple hundred more than at any time over the past decade, even when pay was very low. And we've fallen to near last in the nation again. But aside from all those challenges challenges you guys have faced throughout your careers, Professor, I wonder, do you think that this this politics, the things that you said your student teachers felt in the last year or 18 months, that this could make the teacher shortage even worse? And if that happens, where do we end up if there's not enough teachers to fill classroom spaces?
Well, it already is worse. I just today had another email from a school outside of South Dakota wondering, did we have anybody who could teach math? Could they do their student teaching there? Could they hire them? They don't even know who these student teachers are, and they're practically wanting to hire them sight unseen. Our numbers, nationwide and institutionally with teacher ed have, it's kind of hard to interpret some of it because of COVID when our enrollment went down across the institution, but our numbers, have gone up and down. I've actually seen more students at my institution going into secondary, want to be content majors and teach, secondary high school. And elementary, that's always our biggest enrollment. And so that's been interesting. I don't know what's behind that, but I know I teach in our online grad program as well, and we have students from across the United States, and you hear them talking about the cameras that record them coming and going into school to make sure they're there when they're supposed to be, and they can't work off campus. With behaviors, with the trauma that children are bringing to the classroom, add COVID into that, where we have students coming to school who've never been in social settings. They're not getting, it's very challenging, and low teacher pay. And then these outside forces that really don't know, I don't think, what's going on in our schools or in our teacher prep programs. Like Jim said, we are helping our pre-service teachers learn how to look at those standards and plan lessons and use textbooks and other resources, and to build a curriculum that's engaging, that's students can connect to. We know what to do. We know a lot about how learning happens. We know a lot about how to teach with a multicultural, inclusive stance, but still acknowledge diversity. Just doing that alone is enough for teachers, let alone that we have some hidden agenda that we're trying to indoctrinate our students. It's interesting also that the area of social studies is not one that is tested as much as like the math and literacy. You'd be hard pressed to find an elementary teacher that is teaching social studies every day, because they're told just work it in where it fits, because literacy and math are the two big tested areas. Look at the course strands in the Native American Studies course that's required for every teacher prep program in the state. And there's 4 categories of strands of what we have to have in our program for our teachers that are going out. And it talks about, creating awareness of stereotypes and bias, and teaching the history and understanding what's happened to the indigenous cultures. That's from our Department of Ed. That's what we have to do in our program. And now it's almost being looked at with, suspect, like, we don't want to talk about this because it might make someone uncomfortable. Well, isn't that what learning is? Having that cognitive dissonance and being uncomfortable, and being able to have a conversation about it with other people without trying to tell people what to think, but helping them figure out how to think. and come to a supported opinion or stance.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Birkeland, you said that the reasons you left teaching were the same reasons that you ran for school board. I'd like to just ask you what's going on in Rapid City, because as a resident of the area, I see consistent headlines about the school board there. The whole book destruction and removal controversy that they backed off of. But what's going on there in Rapid City? I saw during the campaign 55 people leaving the district, employees leaving the district on one agenda, 200 during the year. Superintendent has departed. What's going on in that district? They do have local control and they're exerting that, but how would you characterize what's happened in Rapid City and how you feel about it?
Yeah, what's going on in Rapid City is a question I've been asking for this whole year, because this last year has just been entirely different than the Rapid City that I was used to. So last year there was an opportunity where there were 4 of our 7 board positions open, and all 4 were won by a group who kind of had to be frank, a hate for public education. They ran on a platform of not respecting teachers. Like they said their opponents were endorsed by the SDEA as if that was a bad thing. And so then this whole year, there's just been a really big focus on what I would say are not the major issues. We have buildings that have really major issues. They have safety concerns. We have the staffing shortage. And part of that is the way that this board has talked about our staff. As we've talked about here, much like the nationwide, a lot of that stuff, I haven't experienced it in Rapid City area schools in all my time, but for some reason we hear the national news and think that that is part of our board. Luckily, in this last election, the 2 of us, Jamie and I, who won, have quite a different standpoint and quite a different feeling about teachers. And so hopefully we can kind of start to turn that around, because that's what I heard a lot during my campaign and from my colleagues is we've always had low teacher pay. The job's always been tough, but at least we had a board and an administration that we felt were respecting us and we felt were working for us. And then this year we just had this total shift towards the teacher is the enemy, instead of working together like we should be. There's no reason parents and teachers need to be in this disconnect. We're on the same team. And that's kind of hopefully what we can start moving towards. And what we really saw last year was a major issue.
Right. No, thank you for sharing that. I wonder, Mr. Braunberg, you saw what happened with the history and civics standards. A board of about 50 interested citizens spent months producing standards that they thought were relevant to our schools. And we find out after that references to Native American history and culture have been removed or altered. I wonder, you as a history teacher, how did you feel about that? And what do you think is going on with a feeling that we somehow can't or shouldn't teach Native history as it occurred? Because as we know, it's been filled with trauma, and it's been rough to just try to characterize that gently. How did you feel about that? And what do you have a sense for why that took place?
No, I'm sorry. I'm 2 years removed and I haven't paid a lot of attention to the day-to-day stuff there, but I don't understand this concept. I mean, divisive, I think it was Michael that said, isn't that what education's all about, is throwing different viewpoints out there and not saying this is right or that's wrong, just this is the way different people think, and let them make their own decisions. I'm sorry, I'm a little clueless on that one there.
No, Mr. Holbeck, I saw you responding when I mentioned that, but as we know, the education standards were produced, submitted to the State Department of Education, and then altered in several cases. There is definitely a concern about how Native American history and history in general, history of our country, our governor talks frequently about how history is taught. What's going on there? Is that just a political misstep, or is that part of some effort to bringing a new level of control or a new set of standards to our classrooms?
Well, wasn't of course in on the inner circle conversations on that, but from the outside looking in, I thought of myself a little bit as a head of a school of 600 employees and 5,000 kids when I left, and every once in a while we'd call a committee together. And if you'd call a committee together and then throw it out, it's kind of hard to get the next committee formed if they think that their voice doesn't make a difference. So that scared me a little bit, in the fact that these people put a lot of time into it, a lot of effort, and it was thrown out because it didn't read the way apparently somebody wanted it to read. The other thing that I can't help but mention, I, as also a government teacher, I was a history teacher many years, and people would say, well, why do we have to learn history? And one of the common answers to that was, we learn history so we don't repeat the mistakes that were made. How can you eliminate all of the mistakes in our history lessons? Why do we throw those out because somebody might feel uncomfortable? And the best I'm hearing right now is that's the key word. We cannot make somebody feel uncomfortable. Like Sharon said, and I totally agree, my job when I was teaching was to make people feel uncomfortable, to take a side, take a stand. It wasn't my side or stand. You had to take a side or a stand on an issue. That's what we want in social sciences, to create those independent thinking students that when they leave us can make those decisions, so that when we have a democracy, they civically can make good decisions on what we should do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Mr. Bjornberg, you told Stu Whitney that you had shown Schindler's List in one of your history classes. I wonder, would you feel comfortable in the current environment? I know that you had a sort of I've been here long enough to do what I want kind of a autonomous approach to teaching, but would you feel comfortable showing that film to high school students in South Dakota now, or say a documentary about the Trail of Tears, or about what happened at Wounded Knee? Or would you feel like you had to think twice about that right now?
I showed Schindler's List probably for the last 25 years I taught in American history. And like I said in the article, I sent home a letter. Tell you the truth, as the longer I showed it, I kind of stopped sending that letter, because the first 10 or 12 years I sent this letter home to parents, I said, I'm going to show this movie the way they showed it on CBS, the year after it came out. It was uncut, unedited. There's swearing, there's nudity, there's incredible violence. And if you don't want your child to watch this, I will understand. We'll find an alternative setting for them. In the 15 years that I sent that letter home, I never had a single student opt out or a single parent say anything about it. So to tell you the truth, as the older I got and the longer that went on, I really didn't send that letter home anymore, because I figured it was fine, and I thought I did that all the way up through 2020. They also showed Mississippi Burning, and I would discuss before we watched that this is not historically correct. We talked about the parts of Mississippi Burning that were historically correct, the ones that weren't. We also showed Murder in Mississippi, which was a made-for-TV movie of the same situation that was incredibly historically correct. And so I think, I don't know how you teach history without, can you not talk about slavery? Can you not talk about reservations? Can you not talk about what we did to Sitting Bull? I mean, in South Dakota, we talked, strongly about that kind of situation. Stances with Wolves won an Academy Award. Can you not talk about, where does it go? Who makes those decisions? And yeah, I don't get it. It's I know I kind of facetiously said I won't care now because I was in there for 34 years, but I still strongly believe if you have the backing of your school board and your administrators, and you're a history teacher, it's your duty to show those types of things or to talk about those situations.
Yeah, well, thank you. One of our viewers has sent in a note about a few years ago. He was part of a cohort of teams from across the state that attended retreats, and it was called Leading Innovation and Change Through Systems Thinking and Equity. And one of the objectives was to identify inequities within a system and collectively develop strategies to overcome them. And now it seems as though we're worried that we're politicizing equity and inclusion. I wonder, is that certainly the legislature has taken stances on transgender students and trying to determine sports, and in some cases which bathrooms they use. What's the impact of that, Mr. Berkland? I wonder, do you feel like we've moved maybe too far away from just trying to be open about the differences that people have and accepting those, or as some of our commenters on Facebook said, teaching people to accept those differences is encouraging lifestyles that they may not agree with. Is there some rationale to that? Is there some way that you can cut through that?
So I actually also attended that same training when I was a teacher. And I asked kind of the same question, actually. I was like, does Governor Noem know what we're doing here? Because of those conversations. And for me as an educator, and what I've heard from our community is we can talk about parents' rights, but that parent has the right to accept their transgender child just as much as you have the right to not, if that's what you do. I don't need to get in my feelings, but like, it's not the teacher's job, kind of like all of us has mentioned, to decide that. So when that kid walks into our room, we're going to respect them, because if they're going to learn, they're going to need to be respected. If a Native student walked into our room, they need to feel like they belong there. Their culture is respected. So yes, we need to address those things, because our goal is learning, and you don't learn if you don't feel comfortable. I had a student, a Stevens student, Rapid City Stevens student, tell me that they had a student friend who had been called a slur when they walked into the room, and their teacher didn't do anything about it. And that student just was not focused that day. They didn't learn math that day because they were feeling so bad about what that kid said to them. So there's a lot of this talk about like, I don't care about your feelings, but if we want kids to learn, we do have to care about their feelings. Kids don't learn if they don't feel respected.
Yeah, no, thank you for that insight. I wonder, Mr. Holbeck, Stu pointed out in his reporting a pretty clear situation where outside or national political party forces had influenced legislation. What advice do you have to our governor and our legislature in terms of their role in trying to make this situation better, and perhaps not worse by some strong rhetoric that we've seen, and also, you know, a continued, it seems that they're not focusing on necessarily improving education, but trying to alter it to some course. As an outsider, that's the way it may seem, but how do you see that, and what's the danger in that, and how do we combat that sort of one-sizing of national education?
I only served 2 years in the legislature back at around the turn of the century. And I remember at that time, there were some different things that the federal government was trying to institute in every state by dangling a lot of money if we would follow their rules. And I remember that the attitude of our state legislature was, this is South Dakota and we'll make up our own decisions. So we're not going to be bribed into doing things that we don't feel is right. We believe that South Dakota has their own values and beliefs. So it's kind of ironic, I think, right now that we're doing just the opposite, that we're kind of being the puppets of some people at the national level of trying to push a national agenda. And I don't think that's right.
So what do we do about that? What do citizens who care, parents, teachers, what do we do about that situation?
Well,
I know that's a hard one and a big one, but I
it
wonder
is. You know, one of the biggest
that.
challenges I think we have right now is apathy. And I'm a strong believer in democracy, and it's going to fail if we don't wake up and pay attention. And what we need to do is pay attention to people that are running and what they're saying and what they believe in, and see if that aligns with us. And if it aligns with the majority of the people, that's what we should do. But if it doesn't align with the majority of the people, then we shouldn't vote those people in. And if we would do a better job going to the polls instead of just voting for who you saw the most yard signs for, but to get some sort of an answer on where they stand on issues, that would make a big deal. Right now, education's getting under the forefront, you know, in some conversations because it's a national agenda item. I'd like to add to Phil's list about the things on history that have happened. 1939, we're burning books in Nazi Germany. And we're burning books now in South Dakota, or in the United States. We're repeating that history. I don't think that we want that. I think what we need to do is take a look at what we believe and our beliefs here in South Dakota and follow those, and to make sure that the people that voice our desires and our beliefs are the ones that we put out in peer.
Yeah, understood. I appreciate that. I'd like to spend, the remaining half hour or a good portion of that looking for solutions. And I know you just talked about that. And one of our attendees says, vote. That's her advice to the panelists and the public at large. But Professor Andrews, I wonder, what do you know Jason Connolly, who was featured in our story, did student teaching, loved it. You said he was appreciated and respected, and yet he wants to teach anywhere but in South Dakota. If you were with him in a room right now, what would you tell him to try to talk him back? What do you tell your students to convince them that this remains a worthwhile and important and valued profession, and that they should not only enter the profession but stay here in South Dakota and do it?
With Jason, his students, he could see the impact he was having on his students, as could I. One of his students even emailed our dean of education at my institution and said, we know he's going to be done student teaching soon, but he needs to stay here. The students want young, energetic teachers, and we still keep seeing young people come to the institution to become teachers. And then how do we keep them in the profession? Because we know in those first 3 to 5 years, a lot of folks leave the profession for either they become disillusioned, the pay, they can't support a family. When I work with pre-service teachers, just talk about the difference they can make in their classroom, that maybe there's a lot of things they can't control, but they, for the most part, like Phil's saying, I could do what I wanted to do. And I sort of say that flippantly maybe to them, but you do have a lot of autonomy in the classroom, some subject areas more than others, but I just try to be enthusiastic with them, talk about my journey as a teacher, how I'm still learning and growing in my teaching. We debrief what happens in the classroom when I'm teaching, what went well, what didn't. This is exciting. Every day in education, you get to have a new day, a new slate, a do-over. You don't get that in a lot of professions, and that you can really make a difference. And most of our pre-service teachers at Augie, they've had amazing teachers themselves, and they want to go out and be that teacher for somebody else and make that difference. As cliche and cheesy as that sounds, it really is a rewarding, I tell them, look, I've been at Augie how many years? I wouldn't be still doing this if it wasn't important, if it wasn't rewarding, if it wasn't a wonderful way to spend your life. But it's challenging because some are afraid they're not getting support from their families, relatives to be teachers. Why would you want to do that? Why would you waste your content major and whatever becoming a teacher? But I try to model it with them and for them and be enthusiastic myself and share the journey with them. But I really wish we could get rid of standardized testing. I don't think it's informing anything that we do. I think of all the reports I have to fill out at the university level for the state, for the feds, and I don't know where that goes. The data that we know what's happening in our class. I mean, data's good, but it can't be everything. The teacher licensure tests are so high stakes. We can have students that struggle to pass those tests, and it doesn't tell you one thing about how they are. As Michael was saying, how do they create that environment where kids feel supported and welcomed? We all know, like he said, if you don't feel safe in the classroom, you don't feel connected, you're not going to learn. So I don't know, it's scary because it's tough times, and I think people that don't know what they're talking about should keep their noses out of what those of us like on this panel do know what we're talking about. We know how to be good teachers, and we know what works. we read the research. Let us do our job, or read the book about Teach Like Finland and see why those teachers are so respected and have autonomy. And yeah, okay, rambling here now, so.
Oh, that's okay. I appreciate it. It's important. Mr. Birkeland, I'm going to put you on the spot. You ran, you got elected. Jamie, you mentioned Jamie, that's Jamie Clapham, another new school board member. What are you going to do on the school board as a fresh voice? What's your goal? What's your intentions, and how do you go about making change that you think that is important and lasting and is going to make education better in Rapid City and beyond?
So the first thing, and the thing that I think that we've already done, is provide a sense of hope. The amount of text messages and Facebook messages and phone calls that her and I received after our election from educators and parents and former students who said, maybe Rapid City is okay, has been astronomical. When people talk about voting, I entirely agree, because not only electing the people, but sending that message. The last school board ran as if they had some mandate with a small amount of the vote. 3 times as many people voted this time. And I think that sends a message that we didn't want to treat teachers that way. So that's kind of the first thing. As just 2 members, there's not a ton that we can do, but one thing that I do want to start doing is refocusing our conversations on the important things and less on this national rhetoric. Like last year, we tried to pull out of the associated school boards because the national board wouldn't come out. We talked a lot about COVID and vaccines, which, knock on wood, hopefully is not a thing that we have to worry about. Hopefully we can start focusing in on and having conversations about creating environments that are great for teachers and other staff to come into our schools. I wouldn't want to teach at our Robbinsdale Elementary School that's sliding off the edge of a cliff and the doors don't close and the ceilings are cracking and there's holes in the walls. Like, sure, I can teach anywhere, but if I have a choice to go 10 minutes away to our Douglas School District nearby, why would I not? And so we're gonna work towards, and like I said, and I've said this throughout my whole campaign, next year, who knows? But we gotta start having those conversations to create these environments where people do want to come here. And part of that is elections at the local level, but part of that is, as Mr. Holbeck mentioned, the elections at the state level. It's not necessarily a Democrat versus Republican thing, but even in the primaries, there were Republicans who supported public education and Republicans who did not. So just making sure that we're informed about that, because that helps us out. If I had more money from peer, more support from peer, it would help me do my job a lot more effectively as well there. But really just starting to change the conversation, change the narrative towards, we love public education, we love public educators, and we're gonna support them.
Probably finding some more money for teachers wouldn't hurt, and getting our pay back out of 49th or 50th, I'm sure. But Mr. Bjornberg, you have a unique perspective because you're no longer in the fray, but what advice would you give to a young teacher and parents who are maybe wondering and reading news that questions what's going on in public education? What would you tell them to try to maybe get the focus away from politics and culture and back on learning and growing and becoming an adult and having a happy life and all the things we want for our students? What advice would you give to teachers and to parents on that regard?
I'm not so sure about the parents, but the teachers, I mean, Sharon hit it on the button for me. It's, yes, there's problems. Yes, there's money problems. Yes, there's all kinds of problems, but I'm so proud to have been a teacher for 34 years. It was a wonderful career. And, to be able to influence people, I always said you could have 100 terrible things happen and have one compliment from a kid and it erase those 100 terrible things, so it's such a rewarding job. It's such a great job. And yes, there's lots of issues, but, I'm glad Sharon's talking about seeing these kids that are enthusiastic, these student teachers, and unfortunately, wanting to leave the state. But I'm glad she's seeing that energy in those young teachers. It is really a special job, and to be able to influence kids positively, there's nothing better.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Holbeck, what do we do about this teacher shortage? I know we've talked about, in making life better for teachers and more respect, more trust. But if you're in a rural school district, not in one of our 2 or 4 urban areas, how are you going to get teachers to come out to small school districts and name your town outside of Sioux Falls, Rapid City, Aberdeen, Pierre, Vermilion? What can we do to get teachers to rural areas?
Well, people go into their jobs, any job that they have, for different reasons. Some want money, some want prestige, some want power, some want to make a difference. I don't know of anybody that went into being a teacher that didn't go into it to make a difference. I mean, that's why they went into it. They didn't go into it to get rich. They didn't go into it to have power or prestige. They went into it to make a difference because somebody made a difference for them. So we need to reach those people. Those are the empathetic people I want in front of my classrooms. It was the number one question we would ask and put the most weight on in an interview, that we wanted to hear that they cared about kids, why they went into education, that they cared about kids. So you want to find those people, regardless if they're 4.0 in math. You want a math teacher that cares about the kids that they're teaching. So that's what we look for. Now, one of the things that's happening in South Dakota is there's a program where you can grow your own. Educators Rising is the club, the group, and schools can join that. 90% of the people that teach within 20 miles of where they were brought up. So what we need to do is we need to grow our own in these rural areas. There's a lot of people that have pride in those towns they came from and they want to go back there. Maybe not right away, but they do go back there sometimes eventually. We want to try to grow our own and to make a big deal about it. Now, and do this real quick. When they first started this in Harrisburg, they invited me to a signing day, the signing day of the kids that were going to college to become teachers. We made a big dang deal about it. They had cakes, they brought in the press, they brought in the parents. Teachers applauded the kids that wanted to be teachers. At graduation, we asked them to stand and be recognized along with the kids that were going into the military. It was something of prestige to become a teacher. And I don't think I'll have the time here at the end, but when we start taking away that prestige, when we take away that the reason that people went into it and they don't want to do it anymore because they don't find that reward, then we'll not have those people. And then we're in a world of hurt.
We've talked a lot about how teachers can, we want them to feel good, but Mr. Berkland, how do you get the public to, and you talked about the language coming out of the school board and your proposition to change that. But how do you get the people who in our country have been divided in the last couple of years for one reason or another? How do you get the public and parents and people outside the classroom to go back to trusting teachers again and feeling good about what their kids are experiencing in public school classrooms?
It's tough, but I think one thing that would help is better communication from that top-down level. What I've heard from pretty much everyone is everyone loves their kid's teacher. I've met very few people who don't love their kid's teacher. Even if they hate teachers, they love their kid's teacher. And for me, that's a weird disconnect. And the only thing I can think of is they know what their kid's teacher is doing. They know them on a personal level. And so how can we start to show that all teachers are like your kid's teachers? Sure, there's a bad one in the bunch, especially in you get to Sioux Falls or Rapid City. You have an organization of 3,000 people. You're going to have a couple that could maybe use some improvement. But trying to show the public that, as I said there, your kid's teacher is not any different than any other teacher. They're all doing those great things. They all love their kids. They all want the best for their kids. They're all doing their best in, frankly, not the best situation. And so basically just creating those conversations is one thing that I think that in Rapid City particular, I haven't kept up with the entire state, but in Rapid City particular, we're lacking a little bit. Is there's a wall there that needs to come down to show everyone that teachers are the same, that we're humans too.
Well, and I think, my industry probably could do a better job of highlighting the good and the victories rather than, but I know one way you solve problems is to talk about them, just like we are here today. Professor Andrews, you can do everything you can in your power to tell your students how you feel like it's a valuable profession and it's great and they should stay in South Dakota, but is there anything that has to happen at the collegiate level while you're educating teachers? Or do you see yourself creating a new game plan given this new sort of environment we're in? Are there changes that you're making to what you do and what you say beyond just the rah-rah that might be a little bit more helpful? And I know I'm putting you on the spot there, but is there something that has to happen at higher ed to better prepare these students to become teachers and beyond just the love of teaching? Because your passion's palpable and I feel it, but I wonder if there's more that has to happen there.
Well, I think there, as I was listening to Jim, I started thinking, because we're having an Educators Rising group come next spring to our campus. And we've done some things with the Teacher Pathways program that's and bringing groups of students. But I'm wondering if with these small, because I taught in small, when I did my public school teaching, I taught in small communities, and there's certainly, a lot to love about teaching in a small town. But I'm wondering about, we need to get more creative and maybe have some partnerships with schools and sending maybe cohorts of our student teachers out there with the idea that maybe they can move into, teaching, if there's other teachers there, new teachers in a community, then they have a built-in support system. And that's so important to have that network, have someone that you can turn to and network with. And so maybe if we get a little more creative, look more for what are some grants, where are they going to live in some of these small towns? Is there, a decent apartment building, but working more with communities? I don't know. I feel sometimes that I'm tired too. It's an uphill battle, the pay part is, our students at Augie aren't going into teaching because of the money, even if they say, well, I'll go to a different state, but then I have to pay more taxes and, but try to tell them about how teaching is, it's a way of life, it's not a job. It's just how you think about your whole world, your schedule, what you do. But I'm wondering if there's ways that we can network with smaller towns to have a pipeline of sorts and a way to have mentorships and things. I think there's unexplored territory that would be worth thinking about and working maybe with organizations to support that financially. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is how ideas come about, is forcing yourself sometimes to think beyond what has been. Mr. Bjornberg, we're coming in for a landing here on our discussion, but if you could see a way toward, think back to 34, 35 or 40 years ago or whatever it was, you're in the modern world now and you're 22 again. What would convince you? Is there what do you have ideas about how we can make teachers feel better about what they're doing, or young teachers, and encourage them to stay in South Dakota and keep our best and brightest here rather than losing them to Wyoming or Minnesota or where have you?
Boy, that's a tough one. Again, I got locked. I lived in Sioux Falls. I've lived in Sioux Falls my whole life, and I don't think I knew where Parker was until I got an interview there, and I got it in July and ended up getting the job. And it's the best thing. I always thought I'd wanted to teach in Sioux Falls because I was a Sioux Falls kid, and teaching in a small school was wonderful. You got to know everybody. It was just a great situation. So I guess, I don't know, just maybe through personal, having, like Sharon was talking about, or maybe it was Michael, I'm losing track here, but have the teachers that have been there 5 or 6 years, have them really latch on to those younger teachers and stay in contact with them, and personal experiences, what they went through. And because I'll tell you what, I'm sure I'm not the only teacher that there was multiple times my first 5 years is like, I'm getting out of this game. This is this is rugged. I don't know if I want to do this anymore. And then something good would happen and you stick it out, and then here you are 34 years later and you're still doing it and you're loving it. And so sometimes just getting those young kids over a couple of bumps and get them through those first 3 or 4 years is really important. And again, I don't have any solutions, but I think like a mentorship of some sorts, whether it's from within your school or if it's one of these groups that Jim was talking about, where you've got, you know, a group of teachers that back up other teachers from other cities, you know, just get them to understand that if you can get through some of the rough times early on, it's a super rewarding profession.
Mr. Birkeland, why did you go into teaching, and what drew you to that? And you know, being in South Dakota, and how do you inspire or bring forward those same feelings in teachers to, and also how do you see I know you talked about dialogue, but how do you see any path toward tamping down this constant sort of critical eye, and maybe accepting that teaching is fluid, and it is you know, challenging, and students bring, some are prepared, some aren't. They bring some of their life experiences to the classroom that make it hard. How do you go about getting over that hump and breathing new life into the profession?
So I went into teaching. I grew up in Rapid City, and that's why I came back here, kind of like Mr. Holbeck mentioned, right where I started. So I think that is a lot of what we need to focus on is the homegrown aspect. And a big part of that we're missing here, I think, in Rapid City is a diversity aspect, for lack of a better term. We have a huge Lakota population at Central High School and very, very few, if any, Lakota teachers. And so trying to make sure that we're making sure everyone is represented at every level. And when it comes to new teachers, I think part of it is frankly going to have to come down to that salary. I know that like I'm lucky enough that I can support myself on a relatively low salary, but many of my colleagues cannot. And CARE goes a long way. A lot of them are sticking through it and they are working hard, but CARE doesn't put food on the table. And so I think that as a state, we are going to have to address that, honestly. In the meantime, though, I think that it's important to recognize that going into education isn't a only teaching thing. So we could say, okay, maybe you don't want to be a teacher, still get your education degree. There's other things you can do, and then we can try it out and you can still do other things. I think a lot of people view education, like when they take that education major, they're like, I have to be a teacher and that is the only thing I can do. I think talking to them and saying, maybe you think you want to be a teacher, go down that route. And if you don't like it, there are other things you can do. So I think getting that conversation started, as well as like people see business and think of all these things they can do with business. Education is the same way. You can be a teacher or you can do other things if you decide you don't want to do that. So that opens it up to more people, I believe.
Yeah, I think we all have a lot to learn, things we don't know, and there's so much to know more about that. I wonder, Mr. Holbeck, 1 minute, you've got the last word here. Your final thoughts on the reporting that we brought forward, this discussion tonight, where we go, how we move forward as a state, and not further in the wrong direction.
Well, you know, I guess I'll go back and talk a little bit about history. We want things, maybe there's some people that are saying we want things the way it used to be. We're all white, we're all Christian, and gays are in the closet. There's no such thing. We don't have to deal with any issues like that. You know, there's some people out there that are saying things like that. And I think, you know, let's go back to when I was in school. My parents sent me to school and they had faith in that teacher. They had faith in that school. And if something went wrong, they took the teacher's side or the school side. And that has almost totally turned around sometimes. And I wish people, if they want to go back in time, which I don't think we ever can, realize that there were some great things that happened with public education that made this country great. And it can still, if we have support of public education. We take every kid, we don't deny any, we have no criteria about how much money they have or what color they have or what their beliefs are.
Well, thank you. That brings us to the end of our panel discussion. I want to thank the panelists for your participation and really important and heartfelt thoughts, some great ideas. Also, thank all our viewers who watched this live and those who will watch it on tape. Just a reminder that you can always find in-depth statewide news at sdnewswatch.org. Thank you again to everyone for your time tonight, and I wish everyone a great evening and good tidings to all. So thank you again, and have a great evening.